would be fantastic. So the I-STARR project is supported by a grant from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. It's part of the larger NIH Helping to End Addiction Long-Term, or the HEAL initiative, and it's one of several projects that comprise the Consortium on Addiction Recovery Science, or the COARS network. This training is the second webinar in the I-STARR training series, but it's the first training that's geared towards folks who are operators or providers of recovery housing. So what does that mean? It means that we've developed webinars with specific information about operating recovery housing that may be particularly useful for folks who own, operate, manage, or otherwise assist in the day-to-day or week-to-week functioning of recovery housing, whether that be as the CEO of a large recovery housing organization or as a senior resident with governance or management responsibilities in the house. Next slide, please. So I'm Dr. Amy Miracle. I'm a research scientist in the Alcohol Research Group at the Public Health Institute. I co-lead the I-STARR project with Dr. Carmen Masson, who's a professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine at the University of California in San Francisco. The team also includes co-investigators Sarah Zemore and Lenny Jason, biostatisticians Mina Subbaraman and Liba Lee, and communications specialists Diane Schmidt and Dustin Kebsu. Next slide, please. So the I-STARR project activities are also guided by a 17-member advisory board comprised of a diverse group of leaders from across the country. So while most advisory board members wear many different hats, they represent recovery housing and recovery leaders, providers and payers, and national policy advocates, as well as researchers and educators. And I see that we have some advisory board members in our audience, and I'm also excited to share that some of our advisory board members will also serve as presenters in this webinar series. Next slide, please. So we have two different presenters for this webinar, and I've been fortunate to have served with both as members of the board of directors for the National Alliance for Recovery Residences. And these presenters are George Brocht and Chris Edrington. George Brocht's over 14,000 hours of psychotherapy, supervision, and applied community psychology experience has focused on professional and peer workforce development that emphasizes continuous service quality and program outcome improvement. In the realm of peer services, George co-founded the Certified Addiction Recovery Empowerment Specialist Academy, a peer recovery coach training that is operational in several states, as well as the forensic peer mentoring Ready for Reentry training. His clinical program implementation efforts include leading a statewide recovery counseling program for people on parole, starting the Transitional Housing for Offender Reentry Directory and Reentry Partnership Housing Program, opening Georgia's first two in-prison therapeutic community programs in the first 5-day reporting centers, and initiating several statewide recovery and reentry initiatives. Georgia's teaching experiences include many years as a psychology professor. Curricula he's developed have included an enhanced supervision program training for correctional and reentry staff, plus certification trainings for recovery residence managers and for RECCAP, a recovery capital scale and recovery management system. George is a level 2 trainer in the Partners for Change Outcome Management program, a charter board member of the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, and a recovery consultant with SAMHSA's Opioid Response Network. Chris Edrington is equally impressive. He's the owner and operator of St. Paul's Sober Living, which has residences in Minnesota and Colorado. He grew up in Colorado, went to college at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and came to St. Paul in 1998 after years of heroin addiction that left him, as he would describe, without a life. With the help of some incredible people, he built a new life in Minnesota, working in construction early on, and then part-time for Hazelton Betty Ford in St. Paul. Chris lived in sober living housing in Los Angeles in 1997, where he learned about the model. And when he moved back to Minnesota, there were also residences. And in 2001, he had the opportunity to open one of his own. It started with one leased house and has grown into a comprehensive sober living program with 112 beds located in 2 different states. Chris is a founding member of 2 boards, the Minnesota Association of Sober Homes, MASH, and the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, NAR, where he currently serves as the board vice president. In recent years, Chris has been consulting with several organizations and operators of recovery residences, and currently lives in St. Paul and part-time in Colorado, and is over 20 years sober. So with those introductions, I am pleased to hand things off to George and Chris to present on the topic of recovery housing environments and recovery supports within recovery housing. And while George and Chris are presenting, I'll paste into the chat some links where you can find out more about George and Chris and their work in the field. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you, Dr. Miracle. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation today. So we want to get through in the next hour talking about 5 elements of the social model of recovery and contrast that with the clinical environments that are so prevalent. Also, would like for you to be able to illustrate or demonstrate practical ways to create recovery spaces and interconnections within recovery residences, and then describe some areas of operation where peer-based recovery supports can enhance the effectiveness of your recovery home. Next slide, please. So we're going to ask you to complete a poll. If you would, just go ahead and answer all 3 questions. And you should see the poll pop up on your screen. Hopefully this won't hurt very much. I'm kidding. So number 1, who or whose are you? Select all that apply. Are you a recovery residence operator, owner, or staff member? Are you a recovery residence resident? Say that 10 times real fast. Are you a certified or licensed clinician? Are you a researcher or academic? Or maybe you're something other than those, or maybe you're none of the above. Secondly, how long have you worked in a recovery residence? 1 year or less, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, over 10 years. And of course, you can always, well, I guess you have to choose one of those. You can't leave it blank. And then, do you think addiction is primarily a disease, a behavior problem, or more emotional weakness, or there's different causes and cures for different people? Give you another 5 seconds to click on your screen, hopefully get through all 3 of those. Oh, we need the Jeopardy music. Da, na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Yeah, Chris is the musician, not me.
I'll learn that melody on guitar for you, George, for next time.
Thanks. That'd be great.
Yeah.
So, Dustin, we got pretty good representation of folks having completed the. Nice. So, looks like the predominant group, actually, there's 2 of them. One are recovery residence operators or owners, and then others. If you don't mind, put in chat if you're an other, what that role is. And then we've got a lot of folks with 1 year or less, and I'm guessing that's people who also don't work in the recovery residence. And a few who've been in the business for over 10 years. Most, it looks like it's 2 to 5 years. And then the last question, this is almost always the way this breaks out. When I ask this in public, 60% of people say it's a disease, and then 40% say there's different causes and cures for different people. Very fine. So if you would go to the next slide. And the correct answer is yes. In other words, our attitudes towards addiction and recovery are morphing, they're changing. We literally in the middle of a paradigm shift. And this isn't a debate. It's not about who's right. It's about, can we create spaces that allow people, regardless of what they think the cause is, to find a place that they can be comfortable and feel like they belong. And whether you think it's a disease or behavior problem or more emotional weakness, or the different causes and cures for different people, each view values particular pathways to recovery. And the point here is recovery residences really are about being able to connect people with their community, whatever it is, whether it's disease or I'm eating peanut butter once a day. I've known somebody who that was their pathway. And it really is about being able to serve folks that are in the process of either figuring out what their problem is, or they've had some experience and there is a particular pathway that they find works best for them. So next slide, please. So the first solution I want to suggest is to enhance recovery capital or connections within recovery-oriented systems of care. And notice the S on systems. That's really important. It's not a single system. It's multiple systems. I really like this African proverb that says to travel fast, go alone, but to travel far, go with many. That's M-A-N-Y, not M-I-N-I. Next slide, please. So as I said, we are in the midst of a paradigm shift. We're moving from just what traditionally has been a medical model to enhancing it with an acute care model that provides chronic peer support based on social model recovery programs. And I want to contrast the acute care and the chronic care or social models. So with acute care, we all were taught, for those of us who are clinicians, that the focus is on this disease process. And services are really provided by disease experts who provide treatment. And they start by teaching what's wrong with you. Now, in other words, in order to get paid, I've got to make a diagnosis. And so that really is the focus there. In the chronic care social model, the focus is on recovery processes, and it's delivered by recovery experts, meaning people with lived experience, and they don't provide treatment, they provide service. And it's about the relevance of that service that really is what promotes this concept of recovery and getting better at this thing we might call recovery or wellness or resilience. And it begins by learning with each person what's right with you. And once we can identify those strengths and skills and abilities and talents, then we can really make some significant progress. So click once, please. So the acute care model expects relapse. And click again, please. That is contrasted with the chronic care or social model that expects recovery or resilience. I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in treatment programs where during orientation, they'll say something like, yeah, only a couple of you are going to make it. And then in peer support programs, the first comments usually come around saying something like, I expect all of you are going to make it. And it's our job to figure out how to support each other in doing that. I'm going to support you, and I hope you will support me. So click again, please. So the traditional approach has produced significant amounts of stigma and discrimination. Click once more. While this new approach that really is about peer services and social model program promotes contagious hope and redemption. And so the notion is when we create this community, it really does become contagious. And most people coming into recovery residences appreciate the quality of the environment that they're a part of. It may take them a little while to figure out what their role is, but it's still significant. Press once more. And so is it a 6 or is it a 9? Again, the correct answer is, click again. It's both and. Recovery systems of care focus on, in some cases, providing clinical services and others providing peer services, because we believe that the opposite of addiction is, if you would go ahead and click twice, connections. And it's those connections that produce the contagious hope and the redemption that, in fact, will address and begin to reduce the amount of stigma and discrimination that people who are in recovery experience. Next slide, please. So here are the elements of the social model of recovery, or summary of them, from the 98 article by Borkman, Kaskudas, Runes, Bryan, and Barrows. And I'm not going to go through this. Anything stand out to you, though? Anybody want to unmute and say which of these items do you think is really most relevant or most important? Glad to hear from a couple of you anyway.
What if it's hard to pick just one?
No doubt. Well, so I think number 2 is the one that maybe hangs people up the most. It's about valuing the lived experience of people who are in recovery, recognizing that for many folks, they don't use the R word. They may say, I used to have an alcohol or the drug problem, or I used to have a behavioral health problem, but I no longer do. And so the social model is about engaging those folks in providing peer services to others. And in some cases, obviously, people may need clinical services as well. And so it's being able to match both of those with the individual based on what that person thinks is most likely going to help address their concern. Click one more time, please. So I'll turn it over to Chris, and I think he's going to talk about applications in recovery residences.
Hi, guys. Chris Edrington here. Good to be with you. I've been running sober living homes or recovery residences since 2001. I started with very traditional beds with just pure sober living, just a couple of notches above an Oxford house, if you will, with zero services, just housing, and go to meetings and get a sponsor and engage in the community and get a job and pay your rent, don't drink. And I did that for about 12 years or so, 15 years. And then I started to realize that there were potholes or missteps or the places where people in early recovery failed. And a lot of that had to do with time management, money, meds, clinical work, showing up at your therapist appointment, actually going to meetings, and really a routine-based. We needed a routine-based solution. We needed what is now sober coaching, and we didn't have it in 2001. We didn't have the peer recovery support specialist. We didn't have a name for it. I started doing some of that stuff at a little bit at a time, but I quickly grew to 5, 6 houses, and I couldn't do it by myself. So about 8 years ago, I started a new program called the Plus program. And essentially it is everything a peer recovery support specialist you wish would do, combined into sober living on an individualized basis. So we bring each individual in, assign them a coach. And it's not just a meeting of, hey, here's a couple therapists. There's a list of therapists that, here's a bus schedule and here's a meeting list. It's more, what do you want to do this week? Let's really figure out, like, literally, where are you and physically in your recovery what do you do with your time in early recovery, as opposed to what do you think about your early recovery? Because if you want to sit around and think about how sober you are, it's going to go slowly. So we're a very action-based, get up and move your feet and walk yourself into recovery, because we have in a great sober community, and there's lots of opportunity for that. So when it comes to the recovery residents specifically, NAR asked me to do a couple of things, and I think they're going to show you a video, very specific things about how to set up a sober house or manage a sober house. And I, like George said, I consult with a lot of people, or Amy said, everything from what supplies to buy, to how to do intakes, to how to do, urinalysis, to do everything. But when we talk about the setting for a sober living or recovery residence, it's my philosophy that if you can create momentum and unity, and I don't know, harmony is kind of a cheesy word, but more of a momentum in the house with the individuals, then it doesn't matter how nice the house is. It doesn't matter how big the house is. The external innocuous things fade away. And what really matters is that internal energy of the group. And that's what I focused the last several years on. And that's, I think, part of what I'm here to talk about today.
Nice. So let's go ahead and watch this video. Oh, there you go.
Hey, there's me and my dog.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris. We're going to go through one of the St. Paul Sober Living sober houses and talk about a few things about how we set up the houses. Come on, come on. Pico's coming with us. All right. But this access point works really well for us in this particular house, because there's a back porch here to hang out, smoking if you still do. There's a barbecue. So the kitchen in most of our houses, it comes down to surface area and food storage. So as you can see in here, we added some surface area over here because this one doesn't offer a ton, right? We have our main fridge here with the typical fridge with the built-in freezer. And then, as we showed you earlier in there, all refrigerator space with a separate freezer, because most of the stuff is refrigerated. Some of it is in the freezer. We like to encourage community, so this is a nice place to sit. Round tables are better than long tables when it comes to community building. The coffee setup in this house happens to be a little bit over the top, but we've got an air fryer and toaster and coffee machine. This house holds 12 people, so that makes it easy. All right, some of the things I've thought of over the years in the living room is we definitely want a community dining room table. This one gets bigger, and we have almost all of our tables are able to expand. So we keep it small when we're not using it, but we try to encourage big dinners and we bust it out. We have some extra chairs and certain kind of furniture in the living room that allows for a group meeting. You can move the chairs around, so we can easily move this table over against the wall, bring in those other chairs, and suddenly we've got a room where we can sit several people if we need to have a big community meeting. So it's versatile. There's an iMac and a printer and a landline phone so people can do their business. In the living room, furniture. I tend not to use sectionals because you're more versatile, you can move things around. I like couches that have as much seating space as I can get without all the sort of super puffy things with footrests and cup holders. That stuff just breaks over time. It looks great and it seems like the guys would love it, or the girls, but that stuff is not very durable. And the coffee tables tend to get killed by the feet, so we don't put a lot of money into those. We buy them cheap and we just replace them. That's a 75-inch flat screen, which gets a lot of support in the house. Yes. We love that. We've always got a couple of guitars around because I'm a guitar player. There's plenty of photographs around, art that we think is relevant.
And oh yeah, this is also something to think about. These are typical rugs. That one over there too is the same as this one. And I mean, they're available, and what I mean by typical is you can get them at Lowe's or Home Depot. They're very thin, simple, nothing special rugs with a gripper underneath. They cover a lot of area. I think this one is 8 by 12. They're maybe $120. And we have a little simple carpet shampooer to take out stains. Works pretty well. Once it's over, once it's just too beat up, you just get another one. Or maybe you take this one down to the laundry room, and then after the laundry room has killed it, then it goes away, right? So we can repurpose things like that. And we do that with 6 by 9 versions of these in the bedrooms, which you'll see when we go up there. So a lot of tricks to the trade that we've come up with over time. This is something that we've recently done, which is where we keep our naloxone. So we have one of these cases near the thermostat in every house because everybody knows where the thermostat is, right? So here's a typical single where someone actually lives in this room at the moment, has his own closet, some storage for general stuff, a chair. A lot of the bedrooms come with a safe, so you can put your meds or your valuables in there sometimes. So another television, miscellaneous furniture, and in Minnesota in the summer you have to have air conditioning or you're gonna die. So another iMac. When it came time to do a bunch of Zoom meetings for IOPs and AA meetings, we had people on iMacs and their laptops and iPads all over the place. Some of the things to think about when setting up a house is how many single bedrooms can you have? And I know that people prefer singles, but I'm a strong believer that people new in sobriety should have a roommate. So I like everybody who's starting out to start in a double if possible and earn a single over time. I think that's a better way to do it. And then there's also you can't cram 3 bedrooms into or 3 beds or 2 beds into a small room that's really meant for one. So those are some of the things to think about. I think it's important to recognize that when you're talking about chores, it's mostly just picking up and clutter. It's not a lot of deep cleaning. So we'll have deep cleaning episodes every so often where we say, okay, we're not going to do the Saturday morning meeting this week. We're going to do a deep clean and we're all going to stay home and we're going to dive into it a little bit deeper. And then we do that every so often instead of expecting the residents to clean at that level all the time. It's an unrealistic expectation. So I think there are probably 1,000 things I could talk about with the physical setup of a house, but all of the things are thought out so that the residents can have an experience living in the house that has some responsibility to it, feels like a house, doesn't feel like a facility, but also reasonable expectations about what they are going to do and what they're not going to do. And that has a lot to do with chores and generally cleaning up and, don't leave your stuff in the living room. I lived in a sober house in LA many years ago where you couldn't leave one dish in the sink or you were penalized. I've never wanted to run a house like that. So it's always been my theory that if you walked into one of my houses on a Sunday morning early and there were a bunch of pizza boxes out in the living room from a Saturday night before, it's actually a sign that they were hanging out together and that's good versus they left a mess in the house. Because I think there's a big difference between mess and filth, right? A filthy house is neglected. We don't have that. We do have messy houses, a lot. It's just normal use. But I think it matters that the residents are allowed to use the house that way. And you've got to temper your expectations about what you're going to get from them. If you want to run it, like a barracks in the military and everything is perfect, people aren't going to stay very long. They'll do it, but they won't stay and they won't love it. So there's a balance there. Thanks for listening.
So, Chris, you want to just hit a couple of these highlights before we move?
Yeah. there's a million different little things I could, talk to you guys. Some of you guys who are operators, especially new operators, or maybe you've gotten in the weeds because you grew too fast and you have a lot of beds, and everything from, what do we do with mail that comes for old residents? What do we do about locks on the door? What do we do about food storage and, all this kind of stuff? I mean, there's things that are really baseline, like how many bathrooms do you have? How many refrigerators do you have? I could teach you guys all about all the kinds of furnishings I think I like to pick up. But my philosophy really generates out of one sort of way of looking at how you set up the structure of the house. If you think about it in these terms, like, okay, I have 10 women or 10 men in this house. I am never going to get them to always all do the dishes. But if I get them to care about each other and feel like they're part of something, and they feel like you want them to be there, you won't hear about the dishes. It will never be perfect. So I think it's really important to learn all the innocuous stuff, like the external stuff and how to set up the house, and 50 square feet of living space in a room. There are some demands made on recovery residents. There's some standards that NAR wants you to meet in terms of how many, like the square footage and how many bathrooms and how many bedrooms, and do you have smoke detectors, and do you have that kind of stuff, and you have to meet your city's requirement, whatever that is. All that stuff is really important. And then it allows you, if you take care of that stuff and you thoughtfully do that stuff, like, for example, a resident says, hey, my dresser broke or my nightstand broke, and you get them a new nightstand within a couple of days. Then when you're in your house meeting or talking to people about their recovery, you're not hearing about the nightstand. So I think it's really important to look at the innocuous stuff, the external stuff, and learn and do that as best you can, so that you can focus on, what does it feel like to live in this house? Do you feel like the staff cares that you're here? Do you feel like it's safe? Do you feel like you can be transparent? Because I will tell you that in my experience, one of the most profound things you can do in a sober house setting is make people feel like it's safe to be more transparent than they used to be. Because the using life is clandestine and hiding and lying and shucking and jiving. And the sober life is, this is me. This is who I am. I'm good at this. I'm not good at that. And I think all this other stuff is the foundation to be able to do that. Because if you ignore this other stuff about how the house is set up and how you upkeep it, you'll be fighting that forever, and you won't be working on the atmosphere.
So it takes a lot of energy and effort by the operator or owner to kind of make that shift away from my primary concern is keeping this place clean, to how do I make this place so that people feel like they belong and they contribute to the quality of this environment. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, they crave inclusion. It's the opposite of the using life. They crave inclusion. Even the hardest, tough, meathead of a resident you could ever have, if you make them feel wanted, they will soften right up. And you have to do some of this stuff to meet the standards, to be able, so you don't have to worry about that. So, and if you do it, you don't have to spend so much time on it. If you ignore the houses and you ignore the upkeep and you ignore your residents, they will burn it to the ground.
Yeah, or as Katie says in chat, we don't want to be their mom or dad with this stuff.
Exactly.
Next slide, please. So I just want to kind of go back to the social model philosophy. And there is a scale that you can actually administer to find out what the quality or the level of agreement is among staff and or among residents in terms of, are we doing this according to the social model? And it's called the social model philosophy scale. If you're interested, shoot me or Chris an email and we can get you a copy of it. But I truly love this quote from Thomasina Borkman, who I consider to be the founder or grandmother, if you will, of the social model. She and Dr. Kaskoudas were primarily the ones who initiated this But she says you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. And so it really is about being able to make that shift. I call it from me, the focus on me and what I need, to the focus on we and how do I support you as well as you support me. And if you look in chat, thank you, Dr. Miracle, you'll find the link to the social model philosophy scale. Next slide, please. So I don't know if we need to beat this drum a lot more, but it's about where does the authority lie within that recovery residence? And I don't know, Chris, do you want to say more about, and I'd really be interested specifically in your house meetings. How is that structured so that it's more about the lived experience of the residents than it is about the qualifications of the operator or even the owner to say, here's what you got to do in order to stay here?
Yeah, I was in a sober house in LA in '97, and it was you were afraid to break any rule. With so many rules that you couldn't even use. We couldn't use the front door. I used the front door when my family came to visit, and I still got punished. But I was brand new and I didn't know. So let me put it this way: there is structure, there are rules, there are chores and curfew. And I tell my residents often, if you want me to write down every single rule, I'd have to wallpaper this house. we have a resident agreement that spells out, yes, there's some hard rules about using and about people being in your room or visits or leaving the house or not coming home, obvious stuff. You have to set those rules and those expectations, but you also have to live with a certain amount of, they're all in early recovery. They're all probably less than a few months sober, and they're only going to get that much better in the next few months. And they're not, it's almost like, daycare or puppies to a degree, and you can't expect them to be mature and full-grown dogs at that same time. I will tell you this is one little piece about the house meeting every week in every house I have. And I have houses that are $750 a month baseline traditional sober living where you don't get a lot of assistance, and all the way up to $3,000 a month where you get assigned a sober coach. And every single house meeting, we do one thing or two things I will tell you. The first one is, don't ever ask to miss the house meeting. Don't even ask. It's 100% mandatory. You have to be there. So the second thing is, we go around in the group. We have a book, a thing that I made at Kinko's, a little spiral bound book where there's the name, you write the names of the residents, and then you can make check marks about compliance. Like, did you go to meetings? Did you show up at IOP? Did you talk to your sponsor? Whatever your requirements to live there. In my experience from the Minnesota model, a lot of that has to do with, did you go to meetings? Do you have a sponsor? Did you actually show up at work? Do you have a therapist? We don't really have a lot to do with your therapy, but are you going? And we just ask for some compliance. Did you do your chore? And then we put that aside and we go to back around in the group and say, okay, Johnny or Jimmy or Sherry, tell me about your week. And when that person shares, what I want that person to sit in that meeting knowing is, I can tell the truth about my week and I'm not going to get killed for it. You know what? I was feeling in a shitty mood and I didn't go to all the meetings I said I was going to. I didn't do all 3 or 4 or whatever the requirement is, but I went to 2 and I'm sick of that meeting and I need to find another one. Or, I got a job and I'm really excited and my parents are off my back and I'm feeling good about that. Or, you know what? My boss is a jerk. I hate AA, but I'm going and it's hot in Minnesota. And then after you share that week, that sort of synopsis of your week, the house manager will ask everyone else in the house, is that what you see? And by and large, they will tell you the truth. They will say, yeah, I hang out with him. That sounds about right. He's complaining about his boss. His mom's coming to visit. That's a transparent, true statement about a snapshot of that person's last 7 days. Or the other residents will say, that's all crap. He doesn't do any of that. He's blowing smoke. Or I don't know, he's never here. And then you have some real transparency, and not in a gotcha way, not trying to catch you. I'm trying to get you to feel safe in saying the truth in front of your house. So I want you to walk into that house meeting going, man, I gotta tell the truth. And then you do, and you don't get killed for it. Right. And then you do it again and you watch other people do it and they tell their truth and they don't get shamed. And we're not going to kick you out for missing an AA meeting. We're just asking you to start to say, have some comfort, feel safe to be as transparent as you can in this house with your residents. And then you can take that confidence into the greater community later and be like, you know what? I don't have to feel like I'm in the margins of society because I'm an addict. I have people, I talk to them. There's people in my lives. I have friends. I have things to do. And it's a repurpose of a lifestyle. You know, that's what we're doing in this recovery. And I think that the overriding philosophy is this is about getting a life. It's not about just not using. It's like, how do I get a life? And learning to be a transparent person in a house with a bunch of other people is a really good first step.
So it really is a kind of a shift away from the focus on compliance to one of accountability.
One of the things that bothers me a lot late in the last 10 years, I've had so many people come to me with apps for recovery. There's all these new apps, and they almost all are about compliance and tracking and compliance. And there's good things there. But what if you had an app that, you know, all it ever did was invite you to do stuff with other sober people, like, hey, we want you over here. I think that's a philosophy that I really push on, is inclusion, and I feel part of something.
Nice. And there's a long history of research in behavioral sciences, psychology in particular, that shows the most effective programs offer and deliver rewards at a ratio of 4-to-1 over punishments. And that's a really challenging proportion. Next slide, please.
Resident, I will go to the residents that have been there the longest, and I'll say, you know what I'm going to ask you, right? And they're like, yeah, did I talk to the new guy? Yeah, did I talk to the new girl?
There you go.
What I'm going to ask you. Did you go and introduce yourself? Did you invite them to a meeting? And they're like, yeah, Chris, I got the new guy. We went to a meeting with him. I knew you were going to ask me that.
So talk about this sense that you feel when you walk into an environment. Does it feel like a home or something else? How do you make that happen?
Well, I mean, obviously in these pictures, that one looks like a particular living room and the other looks like a waiting room at a doctor's office. You know, the one thing about doctor's offices and waiting rooms and airport chairs, they do that intentionally so you won't lie down on them, right? That's the whole. Hazelden used to do that when I worked there years ago, and I bitched at them until they moved the furniture, got different furniture, because it was a message, like, don't really hang out here. That was the message. So the way you can set up your house and the way it is feels like a home. I don't like signs everywhere that says don't do this, don't do that. Just teach everybody the rules. It shouldn't feel like a philosophy. But I can walk. I'm in Colorado right now, and I walked into one of my houses here yesterday, and it's for the first time in a while. And I don't really know a lot of the guys. I recognize two of them because I'm only out here about every 3 months. But they were coming out of their rooms. It was like 9 a.m. and they were sitting down, and I'm introducing myself. And I just asked everybody, man, I said, hey, what's it feel like? How does it feel? Does it feel good here? And they're like, man, this is great. And, you know, half of them never done it before. Some of them been in other sober houses, and they'll tell you the difference. And I think that, and I answer complaints for the Minnesota Association line of sober houses, and 90% of the complaints are really come down to, I don't think they cared that I was there. So yeah. I'm a big part of, like, what do you guys need? Do you need another fridge? Do you need more spoons? Do you need all that kind of stuff? I don't want to have residents. I want them to focus on their recovery. So there's a real knack to this. And I feel like I can walk into any sober house, and if I can talk to the people, I can get a sense of it pretty fast about what's going on there.
So let me just ask a rhetorical question. How many times do you have people who come to your home, and I'm talking to the participants here, and you have them sign in? Yeah, no, we don't do that.
Yeah.
But often in programs, in particular clinical programs, that's the first thing that you're expected to do.
Sign in and sign out.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
so.
Nobody does that in a home. I don't do that. Yeah.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
So we're about to run out of time. I wonder if the audience has particular questions that they'd like to ask. If you would raise your hand, or you can even put them in chat. We'll take the time to unmute you and have a conversation. I don't see any hands raised. So let's go to the next slide. Kim. Ha. So Kim Bach wants to know, what's the average length of stay? And she could probably tell you for New Hampshire, but what do you think, Chris? What's the average length of stay?
Probably somewhere between 5 and 12 months. I mean, for some reason, there's always been this 6-month sober house stay thing, but part of that in Minnesota was that you do 1 or 3 months in primary, and then you go to what used to be called a halfway house or extended care for a few months, and then you go to sober house for 6 months, and you got a year when you're done living in structured care. That's a generic pathway. My residents, we ask them to commit to 6 months, but we don't make people stay who don't want to stay. We've never done that. So we ask for 6. We sometimes get 2 years and everything in between.
So Stephanie, why do you think your NAR affiliate requires a sign in and out board?
It's been confusing to me, but it's a requirement. And I actually do inspections for the NAR affiliate here, and it's one of the checklist items. So it's sad.
Where is that?
I don't know if I want to say. It's in Arizona.
Well,
I just think that's somebody's opinion of how to run a sober house, and I don't think it's helpful or useful. I don't think it gets you anything. It feels like it's being tracked, and I don't like it. I get why. I get what the intention is behind it, like people wanting to put cameras over the refrigerator to stop food stealing. I get the idea, but it's a horrible thing to do to people living in a home. The camera's not the sign out's kind of small, but
well, and again, it's a concrete way of keeping up with who's in the house and who's not. There's other options is kind of the point.
Yeah.
And Stephanie, I don't know if you can have that conversation with your affiliate, as somebody who does site visits as opposed to inspections, maybe you want to bring that up.
I plan to already, because there are other things on the checklist that I disagree with, might be the right way to say it. And I've already brought it up to the executive council that I would like to have that discussion. So I'll be having that this Thursday. So I'm excited.
Good for you.
Now, I do wonder, because I know that from a fire perspective,
Yes.
just because we have a short-term rental, and we're required to know who's in the house, because if there's a fire or if there is a flood, because our house is at the bottom of a mountain, I guess that's why I could see it might be important to have that sign in, sign out board. But is there a way to maybe make it so it doesn't seem so unhomey like? Might be the right way to say it. And I know that's not really a word, but you get the drift.
Yeah, absolutely.
the first thing that comes to mind is that we do a curfew thing every night, and it gets slacked. Everybody's home, or if they're not home, there's a reasonable reason for that. And you could go back to that if you had a fire. But I see the point in it for the fire thing. But that is exactly the conversation that I have with operators all the time. Be in compliance with the standards of NAR and your state affiliate, but try to keep it as homey and social model and not punitively punitively structured as you possibly can.
So just for those who might not know, Slack is an app on the phone.
Right.
And
It's
as Ms. Sanders points out, signing in and out is not a NAR standard.
No. But there's variation among the states.
Sure.
Yeah.
George and Chris, there's also I don't know if you saw this question in the chat, but this might be a time to ask that. from Trey. How do you balance safety with your practice to double up folks early on? Also, how do you separate by gender, and or how do you include trans and non-binary folks in that practice?
Wow. Well, so
In the chat?
several. Oh, go
there
ahead.
it is. Okay. Go ahead, George.
Well, I was just going to say we could take up several webinars talking about any one of those topics. But I think
I can go quickly through it. So safety with two people in rooms, is that, I guess that's the question.
Yes.
We don't crowd rooms. So there's plenty. This how much square foot is in a room per person or per single or per double varies around zoning districts all over the country. Some will say X number of feet in the room uncovered by furniture if you have two people, X number if you have three. And so that you can get out, right? There's not dressers and beds everywhere, and you can't, it's too crowded to get out. So you can't pack rooms with furniture. Absolutely. Do we separate genders 100% for men and women's houses? Except in my case, I have 3 LGBTQ houses. One is in Minneapolis, 2 in St. Paul, and one is specifically transgender because there's one program that has a track and they basically fill those beds. But we say that you can live wherever you feel comfortable. I have trans people all over the place in men's and women's house, wherever they identify and they want to live with, whoever they feel comfortable living with. And by and large, my residents are welcoming and open, and it's just a non-issue. When I started 20 years ago, when I opened my first LGBTQ sober house in Minneapolis in 2004, and then some gay people came into some of my men's houses in the early 2000s, and I had your one-off 60-year-old guy that was, and I'll never forget it.
Uh-oh.
That's my answer to all. I think I got everything in there.
Yeah. Well, and so the NAR standard is 50 square foot per person of living space in the bedrooms. And then in terms of where gender and separating LGBTQ, basically you ask the resident, where would you be most comfortable living? And that's the short answer.
So Georgia and Chris, I'm going to break in here in the interest of time, but this has been an amazing presentation. And I like that we ended on where do you feel comfortable living? Because that's what this presentation is all about, the environment, and making sure that people feel comfortable in their house and have the resources they need in their recovery. So Dustin, if we could advance the slide to where it says where to find out more information, because George also noted that we could spend a number of webinars on any of the questions that were raised. We want to make sure that you guys have resources where you can find out more. So we've listed some resources on this slide, and I'm going to paste into the chat where you guys can get some more information and accessing these journal articles and these other tools and resources online. I do want to also bring to your attention some things that are coming up with the I-STARR project. If we could go to the next slide. Actually, the one after that. What we're going to be doing next week is, next week, we do have another webinar, and that is a researcher-specific webinar. We'll be talking about experimental designs and quasi-experimental designs. We'll have Michael Shropshire from UCSF presenting on that general topic, and then we'll have Drs. Lenny Jason and Doug Polson present examples from their recovery housing research using those different scientific designs. And then in August, we'll have another 2 webinars. We'll have the Operator Provider Series webinar on recovery housing operations and management. And then we'll also have another researcher webinar in August, and that will be on sampling designs and different types of sampling designs and examples of different different types of designs from presented by recovery housing researchers. So we hope that you join us for those webinars. I pasted in this slide the cover page for the website, I-STARR website, so you can register for the webinars on our website, and you can also stay in touch with us through our social media, Facebook page, Twitter accounts, and our YouTube channel. I also want to talk to folks, next slide please, who have registered for the I-STARR training series. So this is the second of 12 webinars that are part of a training series for operators and providers that you can earn 12 NADAC CEU credits. So if you've registered for the entire series, or if you think that you'd like to register for that entire series, again, 12 webinars, 12 CEU credits, you can do that online. At the end of this webinar, you'll see an exit poll pop up in your screen, an evaluation form. So if you have registered for the training series, or if you think you'd like to register for the training series, please fill out that evaluation form so that we can track your attendance and count your participation towards the NADAC CEU credits. In addition to the credits, folks who complete the series can also will also receive a certificate, but can also have their name and program listed on the I-STARR website. So again, as you exit, you'll see that poll pop up. For folks who aren't registered, you're welcome to fill it out. We hope that we see everyone next August for the provider webinar. And folks are also welcome to come to the researcher webinars, but they are a little bit dry and take a deeper dive into topics that may not be as interesting for all folks. Kind of how we've broken it out a little bit because of that. So that is it. I thank you so much for your attendance, and we hope that we see you back here again.
Amy, I just want to say that any of the operators or anybody who's in the weeds or starting a sober house or trying to get in, or counselor call, I'm happy to be contacted for questions. I know there's a million questions and I do that all the time, and feel free to contact.
Chris, do you want to drop your information, how people can contact you in the chat?
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, folks.